All right, this panel is Feds and 5-0, writing with law enforcement in mind. We've got a spectacular panel here for you today. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Just in terms of quick introductions, I'm going to give you their official bios and then one little thing that they accidentally left out of their bio that isn't for public consumption usually. First, to my direct right here, Lee Goldberg is a two-time Edgar Award, two-time Shamus Award finalist, and #1 New York Times best-selling author of more than 60 novels, including the Eve Ronan series, the Ian Ludlow series, Sharp and Walker series, 5 books co-authored with Janet Ivanovich, and he's written and produced so many TV shows, including Diagnosis Murder, Sequest, Monk, the Hallmark movie series 101, and his award-winning or award-nominated book this year is Fallen Star in the Sue Grafton category. Lee left out that he was hired by Playgirl magazine to write fake letters from women for their sexual advice column.
So if you have any questions, run them by me.
Yeah. Adam Plantinga is a sergeant with the San Francisco Police Department, whose 2 nonfiction books, 400 Things Cops Need to Know, and Policecraft, have become his calling cards to the world of thrillers. 400 Things was nominated for an Agatha, a McCavity, and it was deemed the new Bible for crime writers by the Wall Street Journal. Adam's fiction debut last year, The Ascent, was published in 2024 and became a USA Today bestseller. Hardtown is this year's nominee for Best Novel. Adam has a lineage in his family of scholarly output, including an uncle who won the Templar Prize in philosophy along with a $1.4 million prize. Adam is rethinking his career path at this point. Joanna Schaffhausen wields a mean scalpel, a skill developed in her years studying neuroscience. She has a doctorate in psychology, which reflects her long-standing interest in how the brain works, how it develops, and the many ways it can go wrong. Previously, she worked for ABC News, writing for programs such as World News Tonight, Good Morning America, and 2020. She's the author of 10 novels, and Gone in the Night is her Sue Grafton nominated title. What she left out in her bio is she once drove a car into a house. So many questions. Matthew Spencer was a journalist at the Australian for 20 years, with long stints running the foreign news desk as an opinion editor. He's written for newspapers and magazines in Uganda and Kenya, and been published in the Australian Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald. He has an honors degree in English Lit from the University of Sydney. Black River was his debut novel in the Rose Riley series, and won the 2023 inaugural Dagger and the debut crime fiction category. Broke Road is nominated in the Best Paperback Original category. This is Matthew's first ever trip to the United States, so welcome, Matthew. Kevin Wade is a playwright, screenwriter, television writer, and producer whose credits include Key Exchange, Mr. and Mrs., Cruise Control, and wrote the screenplays for Working Girl, which earned 7 Academy Award nominations, True Colors, Mr. Baseball, Junior, Meet Joe Black, Made in Manhattan, and then for television, the ABC drama Kashmir Mafia, and then in 2010, he joined a brand new series in CBS called Blue Bloods, starting with the second season, throughout the 14-year run, he was the showrunner and executive producer for that series. Johnny Careless is nominated in the Best First Novel category. What he left out was he dropped out of college and acting classes, borrowed his mother's ancient typewriter, and taught himself how to type. And 46 years later, here he is with his debut novel. And last but not least is John Wirth. John is a television showrunner, producer, and writer from 2012 to 2016. He was the showrunner and executive producer for an American Western series called Hell on Wheels. He also co-created and was an executive producer for Woo Assassins, Dark Winds is his current project, and his nominated series, or his nomination for this year is Best Television Episode for Dark Winds Season 3, Episode 1, Big Monster. And what John didn't include in his first paid literary job was translating a Hungarian sex guide into English. So,
You have a lot in common, John.
so let's start with. So let's start with Lee and talk about Eve Ronan. This is her 6th book in the series. What was the original influence to create Eve Ronan? She was such a great character.
Actually, she came out of research for a novel I didn't. She came out of research for a novel I didn't write. Had a police procedure I wanted to do, and I was invited to a homicide investigators training conference in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was the only non-law enforcement person there, and I stood out, by the way. And all these guys came in. The ones who weren't wearing badges and guns had that look, the dead shark eyes that James and Adam have. And there I was. Hi, I'm Lee. They were presenting a case in one of the seminars where if you went into the crime scene with any of your preconceived police knowledge, you wouldn't have solved it. It defied all the tropes and cliches of police work, and why it was important that you have to treat each homicide like the first homicide you've ever investigated, which is impossible if you've been doing it for years. And as I listened to this case, I started thinking, God, this would make a great book. How would a cop who's been doing it for many years just abandon everything they know? Well, they wouldn't. But what if I came up with a character who doesn't know anything and has to solve this homicide? Well, to become a homicide detective, you have to have years of experience. What if she doesn't? And I stayed up all night, and by morning I had this character, Eve Ronan, in my mind, fully fleshed out, the youngest female homicide detective in the history of Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, who got the job not through skill or experience, but through politics and a viral video on YouTube. And now has to prove herself with a case that would make it, a seasoned homicide detective would not be able to solve, but she's able to because she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. That's her secret superpower. And that's how Eve Ronan was born. And what excites me about continuing to do it is I have a heroine who makes outrageous mistakes. She's not perfect. She's not Harry Bosch or Sherlock Holmes. And for me as a writer, that gives me conflict in every scene. It gives me something to play for humor and for drama. And I think that's what makes it interesting for readers.
Thank you, Lee. Adam, what was it about your protagonist, Kurt, that made you know this was the character that was going to propel this series, and especially in this book?
First of all, I figured I can beat Hungarian sex guide. I don't know. It's a tall order. So my main character, Kurt Argento, is a former Detroit SWAT cop. I grew up in Michigan, so I mainly write my books as a tissue-thin excuse to hang Detroit sports references on. But he's more of a door kicker than an investigator. He's never really been a detective. But he gets involved in some cases that require some detecting. So I wanted to write a character who isn't the smartest guy in the room, but is maybe the most persistent. And he should have succeeded because he's fearless. Is it? Oh. All right. We'll do our best here. He is, he's fearless, he's tenacious, and he's kind of like, sorry folks, he's so stubborn that he sort of bowls his way to solutions. I've always been fascinated by books about tough guys, and I wanted to write the most convincing tough guy that I could, while still having to be relatively realistic. He's also Lutheran. He might be the toughest Lutheran in contemporary fiction. If anyone has an example that they want to bring up to contest that, that's my contention.
Joanna, Annalisa Vega, this is the 5th time I think she's appeared in your novels. She's a former cop who can't quite leave that life behind. How has her character changed over the course of this series?
I mean, she's probably the least changeable in some ways. She has the sort of major moral core where she'll pursue justice even when it has a big negative impact on her life, which her life kind of blows up at the end of book 1. Because she ends up having to make a decision that costs her practically every relationship in her life. But that's the extent she will go to. And all the subsequent books are kind of about her living with the fallout from that decision. And, by book 5, she's kind of mended some of these relationships. But book 5 has her revisiting kind of this question of justice and is truth always the highest goal you should pursue?
Great, thank you. Matthew, similar to what we asked Adam, why did you choose Rose Riley as the one to tell this story?
In book 2, and she appears in book 1, so the series is written around her. But actually, to begin with, book 1 was more about the journalist Adam Bowman, and it was my debut. And as I worked with editors and redrafted it, we began to pull Rose out more, and the book became a police procedure rather than looking at the story through the eye of the journalist. So I think it was really just pushing me out of my comfort zone. I could tell the story through the journalist because it was a world I knew so well, but we then decided really it should be a book told through the police detective. So that people often ask, does journalism help in the writing of fiction? And I actually don't think it does, except for the fact that I sort of learnt how to interview people. So I went to cops such as Adam and interviewed them a lot and talked to them and sort of put the case of the book to them and said, well, what would you do in this situation? And so Rose developed out of that process and then became the dominant voice. And the thing about debuts is you have a lot of time to write them because you don't have a publisher or anything. So it took about 3 years and 12 drafts. And by the end of that, there was Rose Riley as the dominant figure.
Thank you, Matthew. Kevin, I mean, you do a great job getting the reader to know Jeep Mullane without dropping us into just chapters and chapters of backstory and his info dumps. How do you balance getting his background on the page and keep the story moving forward like you did? Because it was really quite effective.
Thank you. It's told, the book is told in kind of alternating chapters of present day, takes place in a span of about 5 or 6 days, but goes back 25 years. I didn't have enough plot to fill a novel in the present day. Honestly, it was my first book, so I thought instead of exposition backstory, try to find ways to set interesting set pieces that bring these two up to the present. One of the two is, we find out he's passed away on page 2. So to have some traction with the protagonist's feelings about his dead friend, I felt like you would need to see what got them there. So it was really that. It was going back and forth.
Thank you. John, writing a television episode takes a different level of finesse. Your nominated episode in season 3 takes an established character in Joe Leaphorn, and I really felt that different turn in that episode. There was more suspense. There was more introspection on really what happened in Joe's past than I'd seen earlier on. How do you pull that off?
I'd just like to clarify something about that Hungarian thing. I don't speak Hungarian, and after I did this translation, the guy refused to pay me. So, yeah. I wish I had that manuscript. I'd probably make money on it. Anyway, so yeah, you know, whatever we do on the Dark Wind show is helped by having this brilliant actor, Zahn McClarnon. That guy, you know, if I write a 57-page script, I cut it down to 41 pages because he doesn't really need to say anything to convey what's going on. And I think the thing about television adaptations of novels, for all of you novelists here who are adapting your own work or having your work adapted, the TV show is really something unto itself from the novel. The novel and the world of the novels exists. You know, we are adapting Tony Hillerman's novels. There's 18 of them. They're very well known. But Leaphorn is not as fleshed out in the novels as you would want him to be, because the Leaphorn and Chi novels, some of them have the Leaphorn character in it, and some of them don't. And my understanding of what happened to Tony, word to the wise to all of us, he sold the first Dark Winds book, which I think was The Blessing Way, to Universal, and he wrote a screenplay. The movie did not get made, so he went back to Albuquerque and said, well, I'm just going to write another Leaphorn novel. And he did, and then Universal said, hang on a second, we own that character. So he had to change that character to Jim Chi. So that second book was a Jim Chi book. I think that was Dark Wind, or it might have been, I don't know, you know, there are so many. I don't remember what it was. So anyway, he eventually got the rights back to the Leaphorn character, and then they became the Leaphorn Chi novels. So some of the novels that we've adapted, Joe Leaphorn is not in. So we've had to insert that character into the story, and we've had to do a lot of invention. So, you know, it's all of that kind of character depth just comes out of people in the writer's room telling stories about their own lives and changing the names to protect the innocent, and then it becomes a TV episode.
Thank you. That's very, very good. Lee, I mean, you've touched on television work that deals in law enforcement, and your series have been more and more involved in that world. You talked about going to the academy, the Writers Academy, Police Academy. But how did you prepare to write cop characters? Because you capture that inner world that we live in really well.
I feel awkward talking about capturing cop characters for television when Kevin Wade is 3 seats down from me. I'm just going to pretend he's not there, because he does it so exceptionally well on Blue Bloods. I don't believe my job is doing documentary television. My job is to entertain. So I interview police officers. I have police officers that I can rely on as consultants, and sometimes you have to hire them on the shows that I do. But then I make it up. I mean, I really just want to tell a good, compelling story. I just want to have enough nuggets of truth in there that you believe all the wild, crazy crap I make up. And think, God, this guy really knows what he's doing. It's authentic. No, it's not. I give you the one authentic thing to pull you in and make you believe I know what I'm talking about, and then otherwise I make it up. But the most important thing, though, is not the police procedure. It's being true to character. And we all can understand character because we're all characters. So if you can make these characters come to life, living, breathing people who have real pulse that you can identify with, that's what hooks the viewer or the reader. They see themselves to some degree in the characters you're writing about, or they know characters like that. I would argue that in television or in books, what people are responding to is not the story, it's the character. I love the Rockford Files. I can't really describe any of the plots. It's Jim Rockford I went to. Columbo, yeah, there's some great plots, but it's Columbo you remember. It's Monk. characters you identify with. Yes, story is important, but the key is writing compelling characters.
Thank you for that. Adam, how's your experience as a San Francisco police sergeant influenced how you write, or does knowing too much kind of hold you back?
Well, I think I really like what Lee just said about putting in some authentic details, but then also just kind of letting the story rip. There's author Brad Meltzer who talks about arming fiction with reality. And I love that expression because even as a cop, I know police procedure, I know sort of weapon stuff and fighting stuff, but if you write your book exactly to procedure, it's probably going to be pretty boring. Actual cops spend a lot of times running search warrants and sending emails and looking through transcripts, and if that was all a show, it'd be called CSI Clerical. and who would watch that show? So I think the key is that you give sort of the book an authentic skin, but then you take some liberties with the story, because you want to entertain people. That's kind of the main goal. As a San Francisco cop, one of my advantages is I spend a lot of time around wanted felons, so they say and do things that I just pick up and just drop right into my books, which feels kind of like maybe a cheat code, but maybe that's just the perk of the job. So yeah, I really enjoy that.
Now, Joanna, you're a neuroscientist with a PhD in psychology. I was going to ask you if you could give us a quick diagnosis of our panel members, but we don't have that much time. But how do you draw on that background when you write Annalisa's World?
I mean, I definitely, I took classes on serial killers and stuff as part of my degree, but my actual course of study was on the mechanisms of learning and memory. So I guess the memory part is probably the thing I find most interesting when I'm writing, and what are we but the sum of our memories? Like what we choose to carry with us and what we choose to forget. These are the things that shape our identities, really. And Annalisa in particular had one vision of what happened to her family when her neighbor was killed, her boyfriend's mother, when she was a teenager, and how this impacted their small community. And then she finds out that her memories don't match the truth at all. And so how does that then change how she feels about who she is and her job and her role in the world? I find that really interesting. The psychology, I think, for me is always the basis for the story of okay, so what is the psychological aspect that's driving this story? At one point, Annalisa takes on a case that is based on a true case about a couple that was having an affair. And they were in a seedy motel, and somebody came in and murdered them both. And for decades, his side of the family thought someone from her side of the family found out about the affair, and then his side of the family thought the reverse. So these two families had been convinced they were killed by somebody on the other side. And 40 years later, an investigator comes in and discovers, no, it was just a random thing. They were a victim of a serial killer, actually, who murdered a bunch of other people at different hotels. And when he went back and told the families, oh, we know who killed your loved ones, they weren't happy. So here was what they wanted all along, in theory, right? Justice, but they weren't happy when they got it. And that's because it conflicted with the story they had told each other all these years. And also, it was a random thing, which feels pointless. If they were killed because of their affair, at least there was a reason. Here, there was no reason. So I just find that stuff really interesting, where they got justice, they got what they wanted in theory, but it turns out it wasn't what they wanted at all.
Thank you. Kevin, or Matthew rather, you're a journalist by trade. You talked about that a little bit, but how were you able to capture the inner workings of a police investigation in the way you did?
Well, a little bit actually is what Lee and Adam have been saying, which is I got nuggets of truth from people who know. So that was, in my case, homicide detectives, thanks, in Sydney. And also reading non-fiction books. So I was quite intrigued by the notion of geographic profiling that I read about in the book I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is The Hunt for the Golden State Killer. So I used that in a way which was probably wrong, but I find that all I have to do is bring you along as the reader. So there's nuggets truth to start with, and you're believing in that, then you just sort of push out and take the story where it'll go, but making sure that it feels authentic or right, even if it isn't. Another example would be, embarrassingly, I've forgotten the name of this book, but you'll all know it, and I'm putting it down to jet lag, but it was a Netflix series that got cancelled, and it's about the early days of FBI profiling, I think by John Douglas. Do we know what I'm talking about? Mindhunter. Thank you. So Mindhunter has a detail in it about a small American town where the FBI come in to help the local police because they can't crack a case. And what they do is they have the local police ring their suspect at 3 o'clock in the morning and say the name of the dead girl who they think the suspect has killed. And so, hi, it's Veronica at 3 a.m. So I put that to my Sydney homicide cops and said, what about that? And they said, there is no way that we would ever do that. You just couldn't do that. But I thought, well, I can do it in my book. So it's things like that. And I feel that the reader will believe that because it has happened in truth somewhere. It just doesn't happen in Australia in 2025.
Thank you. Kevin, your television credits are really impressive. Characters in law enforcement tend to draw you in. But what did you learn about cop characters over the course of writing about them?
That they have a hard job, that they're very proud of. They're not perfect people. So in formulating stories over 14 years of Blue Bloods, it became kind of our duty to be able to portray that part of it. And it boiled down to a kind of a little, we had a one-chapter Bible, which is to build a soapbox for one side of a story, whether it was a side of a case or a side of I know that guy did it because of his ethnic, religious, racial background, whatever it is, or his political leanings. You had to build a soapbox for the other side that was of equal dimensions so that you weren't preaching to the audience through the cops that we're right because we're cops. And we, as it turned out, there were a lot of them. They came up to us and said, I'm glad you told the stories that way, because they felt to us more authentic and more interesting. We have fights in the locker rooms, in the precincts, about the exact same stuff. So it was really that, trying to give both sides to any given story.
Thank you. Now, John, in addition to your role as a producer and showrunner of Dark Winds, you've been involved in a lot of my favorite shows: Happen Leonard, Hell on Wheels, Falling Skies, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. They're all on the darker side. What drew you there? Or did you already live there?
You hear me in porn. What do you think?
My wife and I are friends with Billy Collins, who is the former poet laureate of the United States. And he's a wonderful, drunken Irish fellow. And he's the only guy that I know who has tried to pick up my wife in front of me. With no apologies. But we were having dinner one night with a bunch of people, and my wife, wanted to go talk to him, torture him a little bit. And so I wanted to talk to him about how do you write poems? You know, like, do you wake up every day at 7 and have a cup of coffee and then sit down for 10 hours like I do and write poetry? And so I'm asking him all these questions, and then my wife comes and sits down, and he looks at me and he looks at her and he goes, "She's light, you're dark." I'm not dark. I am absolutely not dark. He said, "You're dark." So I don't know, in Hollywood, you start your writing career, you're just trying to get a job, right, Lee? We're just out there trying to get a job. Most of the things I've worked on have comedy in them, and if they don't have comedy in them, I put comedy in them. Dark Winds has an eensy-teensy bit of comedy. The conditions for Native Americans and Navajo people that we write about are pretty grim. And not that the people themselves are grim, but the conditions are grim. And it's hard to kind of, once you start out a serialized story that takes place over a season, then it usually kicks off with a murder or something gruesome happening. It's hard to be funny after that. There was nothing really funny about the Sarah Connor Chronicles except what we were going through trying to make it. And same thing with Falling Skies and a bunch of the other things I kind of fell into over the years. Hell on Wheels, not funny. We had a leading man who we didn't write any dialogue for him, so he never said anything, so it's hard for him to be funny. So yeah, I don't know, it's just, one of the things I keep telling my writers in the writer's room is, let's write the show we're writing and not the show we wish we were writing. And because writers' rooms tend to be pretty funny places, you're trying to slough off the tension of, what you have to do and the burden and the pressure of getting these scripts out. So they tend to be filled with people that can be funny and are being funny, but the work itself is oftentimes, pretty dramatic. So,
to be fair to my old friend John, he started on a very funny show, Remington Steele, and wrote terrific episodes of that show. So I can attest, the man can be funny.
Lee,
Thank you, Lee.
Since we're there, in Falling Star, Eve faces a moral dilemma based on a cover-up from the past. For a character with such a strong moral compass, how does that affect her?
Well, without boring you with the details of the plot of that book, but what I do when I approach anything, whether it's an episode of a TV show or one of my books, is I don't start with the crime or the mystery. I start with, what is the conflict in this book or episode? What is the thing that's going to bring out new sides of the character that you haven't read or seen before, that will generate either drama or comedy? And in this case, my heroine is such a self-righteous pain in the ass sometimes, and rooting out corruption. What if I expose what a hypocrite she is, and that she has done things that she, looking at it from a different point of view, would look at as corruption? What if she realizes that she's absolutely full of crap? And if it comes out, she will be destroyed. Not just destroyed in the public, but unable to look at herself in the mirror. I didn't know what the mystery would be, but I thought, God, I'd have a lot of fun writing that. I would be able to explore aspects of this character I haven't explored. I could explore aspects of other characters that I haven't looked at. And there's room for humor here too, because my heroine in this book also has a TV show based on her that's going on at the same time. And she's always having to confront the idealized television image of herself that's nothing like who she is. And I could compare and contrast that as well. And I really did it just to excite myself as a writer. But I think it's a good note for those of you who are aspiring writers or studying writing. It comes down to character. And even on Monk, we never came up with the impossible crime first. We came up with, what situation could we put Monk in now that would be really funny and really sad at the same time? That would reveal aspects of this character humorously and also emotionally that we haven't seen. And to me, that's the key to a long-running book series or TV series. In many ways, writing a book series is a lot like running a TV series. You don't have the writer's room, you you don't have the free lunches, you don't have the assistant, you also have the libraries with the budget to worry about. But it's the same sort of thing. It's the same, in TV it's the same show every week, only different, and in books that's the same book every time, but different. But different enough that it's compelling to the reader, and I hope to the writer, so that you turn out a better piece of work.
Thanks for that. Adam, you know, for Kurt, in your books, justice doesn't always follow a straight line. In Hearttown, he becomes unwittingly involved in a missing woman and her child, and that encounter pushes him. Is it justice, revenge, or karma? What motivates him?
So Kurt has a very strong sense of right and wrong, but I also wanted there to be some shades of gray in some of the decisions he has to make. He encounters some moral dilemmas in Hardtown, and I find those sort of interesting. He also he's a violent man by nature. He's sort of, for lack of a better word, good at violence, but he also gets sort of reflective about violence. I think that if your main character goes through the book and slaughters 20 people, even if they're cartel members, maybe there should be a little moral reflection about that. So I try to inject that into the book. I find those sort of operating in the gray to be pretty interesting, so I try to do that.
Thanks, Adam. Joanna, speaking of moral compass, Annalisa has arrested her own brother, but had gone in the night, and you touched on it, deals with the concept of wrongful convictions, and it becomes really a tension point between her and her husband. How did that work out?
Well, Annalise is pregnant in this book, so her life can't really be too much in jeopardy because that just gets too dark. There's a lot of dark stuff in my books, but Annalisa often has kind of a bubble around her, but especially in this book. So then there had to be tension somewhere, right? And so she gets called by her brother who's in prison where she put him, and he says, well, I've got this cellmate, this guy on the block, and he's innocent. And her husband is the cop who put him away. So now there's this, we know from the fact that she arrested her own brother, how far she will go. And so her husband going, please leave this alone, definitely isn't going to do it for her. And they're expecting a baby, and now they have a huge conflict. So that way there was tension, and it turns out there's, somebody murdering men, so the husband can be the one whose life is in jeopardy, and Annalisa has to try to save him for a change.
Thanks, Stephen. Matthew, Rogue Road takes advantage of the Australian culture and locale to really great effect. What is it about Australian crime drama that's so attractive to a U.S. audience?
I think a lot of it is the setting, and there was a book that came out, must be 7 or 8 years ago now, called The Dry, which you'll be familiar with. And I think that changed Australian crime fiction in that publishers saw that it worked overseas and in Australia. And what Jane Harper did was take it out of the big cities and took it to a very dry country town. I mean, Americans, you might refer to it as the outback. It's probably not that far out, but Australians would refer to it as the outback. But it's certainly out of the big metropolitan centres. And Australia's a huge country, as you know. It's probably the size of North America, and it has a population of 28 million people. So there's a lot of land and space and desert that simply isn't occupied. So I think a part of it is that unique setting. But there's been a lot of great Australian crime fiction. A fellow called Peter Temple, who some of you will know, who's now died, but sort of writing over the last 15 years. And he was very metropolitan, setting his books in Melbourne and surrounds. But they probably just did not work as well, for whatever reason, as that book, The Dry. And so The Dry changed the way I think that publishers there look at crime fiction and, you know, have a name for it, which is dingo noir. I think a lot of it comes back to that. However, I've sort of broken that mould a bit. In my first book was Metropolitan, set in Sydney. Broke Road is set north of Sydney, and I suppose one way of looking at it would be the Napa Valley or something. So it's set in a wine community, but which also has a lot of coal mining going on, and those two industries have never gotten along. And the town in the coal mining industry has never become part of that tourist wine trade, and it's quite famously just refused to integrate. So I thought that was an interesting place to start with, just two different societies already at loggerheads, and I thought, so that's why I broke roads.
Thank you. Now, Kevin, in Johnny Careless, without giving too much away, you know, you touched on it, that, you know, Jeep's childhood friend is found dead on page 2, but that just opens up this whole Pandora's box of secrets in the past and deceit and corruption. What is it about secrets, deeply held secrets like that are just so powerful in fiction?
That's a good question. I don't know that I'm the guy to answer it because I've only written one book. But for Johnny Careless, it was about secrets. That it was about secrets between the classes. And the book is set on the North Shore of Long Island, also called the Gold Coast, and famously a novel by Nelson DeMille that did a very good job of running down the tribal customs there. And in fact, it was 100 years ago, Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby about the same thing. And the secrets between the upper classes and the lower classes, what the service class knows about the upper classes, what the upper classes try to hide from everybody else, including their own families, became not only secrets but plot engines in a way. Because it was, if you are a little sleight of hand and you've turned them into motives and alibis and everything else. So looking for ways to write a mystery novel, I sort of looked at the landscape and what I knew about it and used the secrets, as you say, to sort of propel the stories.
Thank you. And our last question for this panel will be to John. And in the episode that's nominated, there's a notable cameo appearance by two of your co-executive producers in a jail cell. How did that come to be?
Well, Robert Redford is my everything. I know that's not a fan club of one, but I really took this job because I wanted to meet him. So I had, I've been retiring for 20 years, and I failed miserably at it, hasn't stuck. And so my agent called me and asked me if I would consider doing this show, and I said, and I'd done this show called Falling Skies because I wanted to meet Steven Spielberg, and that was a bait and switch. I did not get to meet Steven Spielberg. He did send me an email when they tried to kill one of the stories I wanted to do, and the email said, SS approves. That was it. That was as close as I got to him. So I said to my agent, if you promise me I can meet Robert Redford, I'll consider this job. So he calls me back like an hour later, and he says, I think I can make that happen. I said, okay, well, when and if it happens, I'm here. Then my phone rings, and it's Bob's assistant, and she said, hey, Bob wants to know if you'd be available to have lunch with him tomorrow. I said, where? In Santa Fe. I said, I am available. I can be there. So I get on a plane, and I go over there, and I'm nervous as hell. Like, this is, he's like, I don't know, it's just too much, kind of. And I'm in the restaurant, and I see him get out of his car, and he's walking toward the restaurant. I'm just freaking out at this moment. And he walks in, and he sees me, and he smiles, and it's that Redford smile that we've all seen. And I put my hand out to shake hands with him, and he says, "Come on, I'm a hugger." And he gives me a hug. So we got along pretty well. I didn't see him that much. He obviously didn't work on the show, but I had wanted to get him in the show. And I was talking to him about, how could we do that? So he and George R.R. Martin are buddies, and he said to me, I'll do it if George does it. And then I talked to George, and George said, I'll do it if Bob does it. And I realized, okay, there's a disconnect here. Like, I don't think either one of these guys really wants to do it, but they're using the other guy as, as sort of a body blocker. So I finally got Bob to really seriously say he would do it, and then George said no. And I had to figure out why George didn't want to do it, and it finally came down to, he said, would you want to go on camera with that guy? I said, no, I would not. So it took about 2 years to kind of make it happen. I had written this bit, and there was a line in there that George found offensive. It was something about him finishing his novels, and he was like, that's not funny. So that failed, and then we finally got it worked out to do this little bit in the jail cell. And then my agent called me and he said, I want to be in that. I said, what do you mean you want to be in it? I want to be in it. I said, you're my agent. He goes, I'm their agent too. I want to be in it. I said, no. So I had to kill that. And then we finally got them both to agree to a time, and we got them both there. I was sitting in my office writing, and I got a text. The Eagle has landed. So I knew they were talking about Bob. So we had set up, do you want to hear the story about how this all happened? Is that the story I'm telling right now? Okay, I forgot for a minute. So we set up this little green room close to the set where the jail cell was. We got Bob in there. He has a little bit of an entourage, his wife and his assistant and a couple of executive producers on the show. And he did not want to say anything. And then he looked at me and he said, I think I'll say, hurry up, Gene. And I said, who's Gene? He said, George. I said, okay, all right. So I said, okay, say hurry up, Gene. And I scribbled it on the script. And so George and Bob were in there rehearsing, and George was talking about his favorite Redford movies. And, it's like, oh, my God. And then we were setting up, and it was taking forever, and we were losing Bob. He was 88 years old, and he was just fading, and I saw it happening. I went out to the stage, and I said, guys, we got to hurry this up. We got to get him out here. We got to get him. We're going to lose him. So we did. We got him out there, and they set up the thing. It took a minute to set it up, but they finally figured it out. He's there, and he says, he's looking at the script, and he goes, so I say, hurry up, Gene. Who's Gene? I said, Gene is George. He goes, why don't I just call him George? I said, yeah, call him George. Let's do it. Action. So he does his thing, says, hurry up, George. The whole world's waiting, which was his line, not mine, but it was a tick on him not finishing his writing. And that's how it happened. And George, was really good in the scene. I was surprised how good he was. And Redford had trouble kind of getting it together. And, he was very kind of befuddled and didn't know what he was doing there. And, it was kind of, it started out as a little bit sad. And then I saw him, right before my eyes, become Robert Redford. And he said the words, and he turned to Zahn and he exchanged a word with Zahn, and it was amazing. And then he had final cut on this little cameo, and you may or may not be surprised depending on how much you know about Robert Redford. So the only note I got from him was, "I don't like my hair. Can you fix my hair?" So I had to do a little work on his hair in post. But apart from that, he was very happy with it, and we kept it a surprise. I kept wanting to blow it up and talk about it, but he asked me to keep it a surprise. So it worked out really well, and then that began this whole cameo thing. In season 2, we used Linda Hamilton. Season 4, I think we used Linda Hamilton. That was in season 3. And then this year we have somebody else who's really, it blew my mind that we were able to get this actor, but it's become a thing now on the show. And it was wonderful I actually wrote, the words that I wrote in that scene, which weren't many, but a few, were the last words that he said on camera, which was amazing.
Yeah, no, that was really something. So thank you. We have run over time, but we do have time for just a couple of questions before we break for lunch. Any questions? No? Well, then let's break for lunch. Back at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock for the next panel. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.